Hey everybody, this is Emily here at the Studio for Art and Craft, and today I'm going to show you how to do this beautiful cardinal vase. So first let me introduce to you what's going to be in your kit. You're going to have the paints, you're going to have a couple cups marked roll, that's going to be for roll glazing, and a cup with a line on it. You're also going to have a toothbrush, I'll explain what that fun is for later. And it's also going to come with a vase that already has the design on it for you. All right, we also have a placemat and a paper towel. And then you will have either purchased your brushes or you would have gotten a loaner brush set. And I'm gonna use these ones. I'll explain which one I'm using as we go. All right, so let's get started. So step number one, we're gonna roll glaze. So we're gonna take this cup that has the line on it and pour some water in up to the line. Then you're gonna take your paints marked roll and dump those in as well. And then you're gonna take the back end of one of your paint brushes, doesn't matter which one, mix it all together to mix that water in with the paint. And then you're gonna take your vase and you're gonna dump the paint in. The most important thing for this is you wanna make sure that once you dump that paint in, you don't sit and hold it. You wanna dump it at an angle, that way it doesn't pool in the bottom of the vase. So we're gonna take the paint, pour it in, and immediately start rolling it around. I like to work over my cup, that way if it starts to pour back out, it goes back into my cup. And pour it up. I like looking at it so I can see where I've coated already. All right. And then we'll just hold it upside down for a few minutes to let the extra drips come out. Don't really worry too much if you get it on the outside because we're going to use that color on the outside as well. But you could take your paper towel if you have a big lines or so and just kind of wipe it off. And that way it's not in your way later. All right. So we're just gonna let that drip upside down for a little bit so it doesn't pool into the bottom. And while that's doing that, we are going to get our background color ready, which we are going to make a wash of blue and gray and paint it all around. So again, you've got your cups with a line where the paint is and a line for where you're gonna add your water to for your blue and your gray. And I'm just gonna add some in. You can always add a little bit more. So I'm gonna put a little bit in, then I'm gonna take my large brush here, mix it together. And then I'm actually just gonna take that extra paint and I'm gonna start painting right on my vase. And you'll notice, since it's a wash, you can still see the stencil right through it. And I like to paint in different directions. This is one of those things where we're gonna cover the whole thing, but be as sporadic as you want. We've got the blue. I'm gonna mix up some of the gray because I like to go back and forth between the two. That way the two can mix together. If you get to a spot where you notice you're starting to cover your lines, go back over that spot again because you have too much paint there. So that way you can just shift it around and cover the whole outside. You're gonna do this all the way around the vase. Again, bouncing back between the gray and the blue. All right. And if your vase is really wet, you can put it in front of a fan to let it dry for a little bit before you move on to the next step. So we've got those sides. I'm just gonna do these sides. So again, I'm kind of painting in one direction, then in the other. And mixing back and forth between the two colors. And again, I'm using that nice large flat brush. All right. So now we are going to work on starting to paint in our cardinals. So I'm going to start with my female cardinal here and grab my tan. And my medium brush here, and I'm going to paint in most of the body with this. You can use the brush on an angle like that to get into the points. And as I get towards the tail, I'm going to pause and grab my orange and red. And I like to have a cup of water handy so I can rinse it if I need to. But I'm gonna grab a little bit of the orange and mix it in right at the edge here. Just dabbing off some extra paint there. You can see as you go back and forth, it blends it in together. And then for the very end, I'm going to use my red. Have some red at the end of his tail, or her tail. All right, so that's our first coat. And then I'll come in with a smaller brush here to paint in the beak. And that way the rest of the body can dry for a little bit as I paint that in. Because I want to do 2 good coats. If you've got 2 solid coats on there, it comes out pretty good. So rinse that brush, grab some more of my tan here. And as soon as a coat isn't shiny, it's ready for the next coat. So I'm going to come back in and go ahead and get that next coat on here. We're also going to paint in his upper wing the same way I did the tail, where I add in a little bit of the orange and blend it in with a little bit of the red at the end. And you don't have to rinse your brush in between colors. Sometimes it helps blend the colors together when you have a little bit of each on the brush. And you'll notice some of my lines are hard to see. As long as you can see them, they'll show through a little bit. All right. So now that that part is done, we're going to go back and do the second coat on the beak. All right, and then we'll do this part with black. So you're gonna wanna let this dry in between coats here. So I'm gonna get that first coat of black on and let it sit so it can dry. All right, so while that's drying, I'm gonna go ahead and work on my other bird over here. And this guy is gonna be the male cardinal, where we're gonna do all red except for a little bit of black and a red beak. And that is my bigger jar of red over here, is what I'm gonna use for him. And I am painting right over those lines you can see, because they will shine right through. And feel free to switch to a smaller brush if that works for you. I like to turn my brush to the side to get in there, but if it's easier to use a smaller brush, go ahead and do so. All right, so that coat is pretty good on there. That's one coat. We're gonna let that dry again. And while that's drying, I can switch back to black and do the black around here. And see if that black is dry to do the black on a second coat. Not quite yet, so we're gonna let that dry. Rinse my brush. You can use your paper towel to wipe off any additional paint that's not coming off the brush. Use some orange to paint in the beak. All right. So looks like my red is just about ready for its second coat. Using that bigger pot of red this time. All right, and you could do a third coat on there if you wanted it to be darker. I like two coats having a little bit of the color rate like that. All right, so we've done that. My black is drying, so let's head on back and do my second coat of black here. Okay. All right, so we've got our cardinals all done there. Now we're going to move on to our branches. Let's rinse and clean brushes. Perfect. I'm just going to put some lids on these paints. All right, so we are going to get the pod of brown here. And we are going to paint in the bottom part of the branch. So you'll notice I'm only gonna do the bottom. Actually, you know what? I wanna do the top first, so I'm gonna use the white instead. Put in the snow first. That way if I accidentally go over the line to where the brown is, I can just paint over it. So let's open up the pot of white here. And use a small brush, and we're just gonna come in at the top. And paint that in. So it's the top line on all of the branches. If it's a smaller area, I'm gonna switch to a smaller brush, like right here. All right, and that's just the top of the branches where you can see the snow falling on it. And we can go back and do our second coat over top of that. Okay, so let's clean that up. And while we're letting that white dry, we're gonna move on to our pine needles here. And we're gonna paint those in with green. Okay. And for this, I like to do just one coat because it puts a nice cool look. So a nice big amount of paint on your brush, and you can see just kind of follow the lines there. It does not matter if you stay in or out of those lines. it's actually good to have some space in between there. There we go. So there's one. All right, so there we go. And just keep getting more paint on your brush. Since we're only going to do this once, it'll put a nice light layer. And you can see I really am not trying to be perfect on staying in the lines on these. I'm just basically going right over top of it, and then the lines will show through. Since we're just doing one little coat there, all right. All right, so those are all done. We're gonna clean our brush, and now we're gonna move on to the brown. And for the brown, we're gonna do the underside of each of the branches and the pine cones. So on the sample here, you can see underneath, and then every pine cone there. And again, I'm using my small brush. Feel free to use a larger or small brush, whatever you're comfortable with. And I'm just gonna paint right over top of that pine cone. Okay, and so we're going right up to the edge of the vase there. And again, don't try to paint inside the lines of these pine cones, just paint right over them. That black is gonna show through. You can already see it coming through as I paint the brown over top. All right, so now that I got one coat on all the brown, I'm gonna head back and do my second coat. Because back up at the top where I started is already dry. All right, so we've got our 2 coats of brown on there. If it's very light in a spot and you had 2 very, very thin coats, feel free to go over any spots if you want to darken it up. You can add a little bit more paint over it. But that is the end of that. We have our cardinals done. We have our branches, our pine needles. So we have one final step to do here. And it involves that toothbrush. I bet you've been wondering what we're gonna do with it. So what we're gonna do is we are going to take it and we're gonna use the white and we are going to flick paint on it to create little snow droplets everywhere. So I like to start, make sure when if you set your vase down that it's not on a side that's wet. If you need to let it dry before you do this step, feel free to. So I'm gonna do this side because that side's a little wet. We're gonna dip the end of the toothbrush into the pod to get some paint on it. And I'm gonna take my finger and flick it, and you can see it puts nice, cool snow everywhere. I suggest starting with maybe the plain side. That way you can get the hang of flicking it and you don't get a big dot all over your bird. Although I kind of like the dots even when they land near my bird. It looks cool. So I'm just keep getting more paint and adding snow all over it, all the sides. You can also do it with it standing up. Get more paint, flick the snow right on it. All right. And that is your cardinal vase. So go ahead, let it dry, and then you're gonna pack it back up and bring it back to the studio along with the pods for me. And if you rented brushes, you can bring those back too. And when you get it back, it'll be nice and shiny, fresh out of the kiln. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for painting with me today.